Total population as of 2009, 36 million people approximately. One of the limitations of this is simply that these are estimates and not like total numbers, because definitely some people do not necessarily fill out the census form and all of these other discrepancies here and there. So this is just an estimate. The other caveat that I wanted to bring up ahead of time, when we're going to be talking about the foreign-born population, the U.S. Census data does not provide information about the type of status that an individual has or doesn't have. So the only thing that it does distinguish is between a U.S.-born individual versus a foreign-born individual, and whether that foreign-born individual became a naturalized U.S. citizen or is currently not a U.S. citizen. Those are the only type of distinguished statuses that are distinguished within the U.S. Census data. And as you can see, these are all the counties of California. So this is a slide that basically illustrates the U.S.-born versus foreign-born population. The total U.S.-born population here in California amounts to about 72.10%, whereas the foreign-born population is 26.80% of the population. And these are estimates based on between 2007 and 2009. The 2010 census data is not available online yet, so I wasn't able to include those type of estimates there. But it is safe to say that either they are going to be remaining around the same, or there's just going to be like a 1 or 2% difference in that. So this is California's racial and ethnic makeup. Obviously, you can go ahead and see that 42.5% of the population here in California is primarily white, while 36.10% is Latino, 12.10% is Asian American, and 6.0% is African American. Definitely illustrating and confirming the new majority minority state. The foreign-born population and their length of residency in the U.S. is very important because it illustrates the fact that many of California's immigrants are long-term residents. So they've been living here for 10 years or more, maybe even 20, and 78.2% of them entered before 2000, whereas 21.8% entered after 2000. Some of the implications that this could, or the assumptions that we could go ahead and make, is that those that entered after 2000 might not necessarily have some type of legal status or a pathway to legal status because they probably didn't have those type of networks before then. Some of them might not be 245I eligible, and so on and so forth. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about congressional elected officials and their voting record on immigration issues. As everyone knows, there's a total of 53 House of Representatives here in California, and at least 34 are Democrats and 19 are Republicans. The legislative bills. These are the legislative bills that we decided to select because these were the only ones that were brought up in the previous legislative cycle. So everyone knows CIRASF, right? HR 4321. It had a total of 18 co-sponsors, and I can go ahead and give you down the political party breakdown of the sponsorship. So at least all 18 of them were Democrats and 0 Republicans. So that says a lot, right? The DREAM Act had a total of 31 co-sponsors, and at least 30 of them were Democrats and only 1 Republican. And that Republican was Devin Nunes from Tulare County, Visalia area. And then we actually analyzed the actual DREAM Act vote, which happened around December. A total of 33 congressional members voted yes. 19 individuals voted no, and 1 of them had a no vote. So it is safe to assume that those that voted yes in favor were Democrats, so it was definitely a party line vote. And then the 1 no vote, I believe, was a Democrat. I can't remember which one. And then the second thing that we analyzed is the Ag Jobs, the Agriculture Jobs Bill, and it had a total of 16 co-sponsors, and for the most part, they were all Democrats, except for 2 Republicans, which were Devin Nunes once again, and George Radanovich from Mariposa County area. So this is a co-sponsorship and voting record by political party. As you can see, it's already broken down right here. And all of these bills, which are pro-immigrant, usually go down a party line vote. All Republicans voted against the DREAM Act. Even Devin Nunes, who was originally a co-sponsor of the bill, he voted against it, as well as, and then the other 2 co-sponsors of the Act also were just co-sponsors. It wasn't voted on at all. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about the difference between congressional Republican district demographics and congressional Democratic district demographics. And the reason for that is because we want to highlight the impact that this might have on immigrant populations within those specific districts and what it means for our future work here at CIPC. So for at least 18 out of the 19 congressional Republican districts, their U.S.-born percentage was actually higher than the statewide percentage of 72.1%. So statewide, like we mentioned before, 72% of that individuals here in California are U.S.-born. And in specific districts like Tom McClintock's district, 90.8% are U.S.-born. And I only selected the top 5 percentages. So we go ahead and see Wally Herger, Kevin McCarthy, Jerry Lewis, and Duncan Hunter. They are the ones that had the highest U.S.-born population. And for the most part, they also had the highest population of white residents as well. So this is actually let me go back. The only district that did not have a U.S.-born percentage higher than the 72.1% was Ed Royce. And Ed Royce's district was actually had about a 30% foreign-born population in it, and the majority were of Latino origin. The foreign population that entered before 2000, and again, these are estimates based on like the top 5 congressional Republican districts. There are a total of 19 of them, and these are the top 5. It only printed one page. So Ken Calvert, Gary Miller, Jerry Lewis, Darrell Isa, and David Dreyer. Those are the percentages that we had. I don't know if I have the, yeah. And then the other one was the foreign-born population that entered after 2000. And the statewide population is around 21 or 22%. And Dan Lundgren, George Radanovich, I believe that's how you pronounce it, as well as Brian Gilbray, Wally Herger, and John Campbell had higher percentages of the foreign-born population. So what does this mean for immigrant residents within these specific districts? It means, it brings up questions of like representation and how these representatives are taking into consideration the needs and considerations of people that live within the district. So this is obviously an issue of concern that may or may not change based on the recently redrawn congressional districts, and whether there's still going to be potential for Republican candidates to assume those types of positions as well. Now that we've already covered the length of residency for some of these individuals, if you go ahead and notice, the foreign-born population that was naturalized as of 2010, there's a difference, right? So in David Dreyer's district, it actually has the highest naturalization rate. But here, it also had the largest one. So the foreign-born population with David Dreyer's district, for some reason or another, is able to naturalize his or her status. The same goes for Gary Miller, right? You see him right there. And the same can be said about, I believe, that's about it. Those 2 specific individuals. The foreign-born population that is not naturalized as of 2010, Devin Nunes has the highest one. He's a congressional Republican with the highest one. Mary Bono Mack out of Riverside, George Radonovich, Daryl Issa, and Wally Herger. And if we notice, Wally Herger is somewhere over here as well. So it has one of the highest foreign-born populations that entered after 2000, and it also has one of the lowest rates of, actually one of the highest rates of foreign-born populations that are not naturalized as of 2007. So it can mean a couple of things, whether individuals are not having access to affordable and accessible immigration remedies within the district, or they could be legal permanent residents who are still in the process in changing their status, or a high increase of undocumented immigrants within that specific district. The Latino population percentage out of the entire congressional Republican district. So what this means is at the statewide level, there are 36.10% Latinos, right? But within Devin Nunes's, the Latino population is actually 48.2%, and it might actually be higher than the white population there, right? So if he's supposed to be taking into consideration all of the needs and considerations of all of his or her residents, this should definitely be something that we can use and say, look, you're not necessarily voting on behalf of your residents, right? And the same can go ahead and be said by Karen Calvert, Mary Bono, Howard McKeon, and Daryl Issa. So these are the top 5 congressional Republican districts with the highest Latino population percentage out of the other 19 congressional districts that are Republican. And then now we're going to go to the next slide. Now we're going to be talking about the congressional Democratic districts after we already talked about the Republican ones. Just give me a second real quick. So for 12 out of the 34 congressional Democratic districts, their U.S.-born percentage of the population was actually more than the statewide average of 72.1%. So it could mean a couple of things, that these individual representatives are progressive, or they're just really in tune with values of opportunity and embracing different ethnic and racial backgrounds. So Mike Thompson actually has this district actually has 84.4% that are U.S.-born individuals. Lynn Wolfing, Jerry McMurney, John Garamendi, and Doris Almatsui. They're relatively from Northern California area, and they have a higher percentage of U.S.-born population. These are actually the top 5 representatives with the highest foreign-born population as opposed to the other ones. So at the statewide level, we already established this percentage. But if we look at Javier Becerra's district, at least 51.4% of individuals living within that district are actually foreign-born. Loretta Sanchez, which is from Orange County, she has a total of 48.1% of her residents being foreign-born. Lucille Roybal Allard, where I'm actually from, East Los Angeles area, 44.5% are foreign-born. Adam Schiff and Howard Berman from the LA area they also have higher percentages of foreign-born individuals. The foreign-born population that entered before 2000, if you go ahead and notice, Linda Sanchez has the highest one, followed by Grace Napolitano, Zoe Lofgren, Judy Chu, and Harry Waxman. If you look at the foreign-born population that entered after 2000 in Democratic districts, Ana Esho has the highest one, so she has the highest population of immigrants that are recent. Suzanne A. Davis, Doris in Central Sacramento area, Barbara Lee, which is here in the Oakland district area, and Mike Honda. And I can actually go ahead and provide,
I have a question. I know we're probably taking questions after the presentation. Where is Susan Davis Where is her district from?
Let me
I think that's an interesting.
Susan Davis is from the San Diego area. Around the area.
So mostly Northern California, with the exception of one San Diego district, has a newly arrived foreign-born population.
Yes.
Huh.
If I'm not mistaken. Yes. And so that's the foreign-born population in terms of length and residency. Zoe Lofgren, from what I understand, she's been okay on immigration issues, and she has every right to be, because she has a big foreign population in there that has been there for a long time, as well as Judy Chu. She's been supportive of DREAM Act issues and all that. So the foreign-born population that was able to naturalize as of 2010 in congressional Democratic districts is as follows. Jackie Spears' district actually has the highest one, followed by Henry Waxman, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, and Peter Stark. The foreign-born population that is not naturalized as of 2010 in congressional Democratic districts is as follows. Jim Costa has the highest one. Jim Costa is from the Central Valley area, and I believe he's a Blue Dog Democrat as well. Lucille Roybal-Allard has the highest foreign-born population without naturalization. Sam Farr, Javier Becerra, and Maxine Waters as well. And these are just estimates, and I can go ahead and provide detailed percentages, because these are around the 70–60% range. But there are specific differences between each district. Okay, so for at least 18 out of the 34 congressional Democratic districts, the Latino percentage out of the entire district population within that district was actually higher than the statewide average. So for example, Lucille Roybal-Allard, at least 80.1% of the population within her district are Latinos. Grace Napolitano has 74.6%. About 70% of residents within Javier Becerra's district are also Latino, and the same goes for Loretta Sanchez and Jim Costa.
Well, it's interesting to compare those names to the 7 Congress members who stood up against ESCOM a couple months ago, and there's obviously a lot of overlap, so I think that's pretty interesting.
For at least 16 out of the 34 congressional Democratic districts, the Latino percentage out of the entire district population was actually lower than the statewide average. And if we could go ahead and look at that, Anna Esho has one of the lowest ones. Actually, Henry A. Waxman has the lowest one, followed by Jackie Spears, Lynn Wolfe, Mike Honda, and Anna Esho. But if we actually go back to a few slides back, you can go ahead and notice that Jackie Spears' district has the highest naturalization rate as of 2010, right? And yeah. So the state senators and their voting record on immigration issues.
Actually, Gina, if you can hear us, I'm wondering if we can just pause, because I know that was a lot of information and people might have questions for Mario before we move on to the state.
Yes,
so can we unmute, or I'm not sure what the process is.
Yeah, give me 1 second and I'll mute everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone's unmuted.
So I just wanted to give an opportunity. I know that was a really good overview of the federal level, and before Mario moves into the state level, if there are any questions or comments that we can direct towards Mario. I mean, we'll have a discussion towards the end, but if there's something that we need to clarify before we move forward, that would be great.
I have a question. This is Reshma. Can you hear me?
Hi, Reshma.
Oh, hi. Great. Thank you for doing this. It's really interesting. I was wondering if you looked at any other populations besides Latinos, like API populations, because I'm thinking some of these folks may actually be in like API-heavy districts, even though they have lower Latino populations.
Right. And I was actually going to include that type of information, but some of the percentages for the API community were actually around the 10% range. And so it didn't allow for a good illustration of how diverse some of these districts were. I did want to include a specific slide where both the Latino and Asian American community actually complement one another to become a majority-minority district that are actually 50% or more. But that's information that I wasn't able to include in this slide. But I think that's a very good point that you do bring up, and I would be more than happy to include it in the slide afterwards.
Thank you. That would be great.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, I was just personally struck by the Republican Nunez out in Visalia, who's been a co-sponsor, even though he didn't, of the DREAM Act as well as Ag Jobs. Given his district, I shouldn't be surprised, but I was also really interested. It was interesting for me to hear that even though he was a co-sponsor of DREAM, he actually voted no during the final vote. But I think that there could be some opportunity with some of the work in Central California to take a look at that district and the allies that we have in that area, being able to advocate for the immigrants in that district.
Yeah. And I think that this also brings up questions of like voter mobilization during election season to try to engage a lot of these individuals or districts who have high naturalization rates. And immigrant populations that have been residing in that district for quite some time or have lived here in the U.S. for quite some time. How do we go about making sure that they have some type of legal status so that they could go ahead and influence their local politics? Because the way that a lot of these recent immigrants are able to advocate for themselves is at the local level. And so making sure that they have a voice and that, you know, if they're able to register to vote or become citizens to register to vote, then efforts around those type of you know, issues would be a really good one. But I think that's much for other type of field organizations. Okay, so are there any other questions that folks have? No? I'm going to go ahead and move on then. Now I'm going to go ahead and specifically look at the state senators and their voting records on immigration issues. I wasn't able to provide demographic information for, well, actually the demographic information for these districts is available, but it's not as relevant as the congressional ones because they tend to complement each other. So the specific bills that we actually looked at was the California DREAM Act, AB 130, and the Agricultural Workers Bill, SB 104. And the only reason that we're looking at these two specific bills within the state Senate is because these are the only bills that were able to go through the Senate floor. Also, I included information about the co-authorship and the vote committee votes, the votes in the specific committees for each bill. But I didn't find that information as relevant as the overall general votes because some of the individuals that were sitting in the committees voted in favor of these bills once they hit the Senate floor. If they didn't vote in it, they had no vote, but they didn't necessarily vote against it. So if we look at the California DREAM Act, AB 130, all 25 Democrats voted in favor of it, along with one Republican, which is Canela. 11 Republicans voted against the bill, and 3 individuals had no vote. If we look at the Agricultural Workers Bill, SB 104, actually that's a mistake. All 24 Democrats voted in favor of the bill, not 24 Republicans. That would be like, if only, right? And only one Democrat did not vote. 14 Republicans voted against it, and only one did not vote. Sorry about that mistake. That would be funny in real life. So those are the specific bills within the state Senate. The other bills are still pending going through the Senate floor, and until we have that specific type of information, we're unable to include that type of data into this PowerPoint slide. But if anyone has any specific questions around this section, please feel free to ask. Okay, So now we're going to be looking at the state assembly members and their voting record on immigration issues. There are a total of 9 issues that we looked at. Specifically, we looked at the California DREAM Act, both AB 130 and AB 131. At least once they hit the assembly floor, 48 Democrats voted in favor of it, 0 voted against it, and 4 did not vote, either because they were not present or for other reasons. 0 Republicans voted in favor of it. All 26 voted against it, and 2 did not vote at all. The same can be said for the California DREAM Act, AB 131. And in fact, if you look at this, more Democrats voted in favor of it, as opposed to the 48, and only 2 did not vote. And 27 Republicans voted against AB 131, and only 1 did not vote. This type of trend is actually seen throughout many of these bills, where the votes are strictly around partisan lines. The next bill that we looked at was helping health consumers understand their coverage, which is AB 922. 51 Democrats voted in favor of it in the Assembly, 0 voted against it, and 1 did not vote. Republicans and their voting record on this specific issue, 0 voted in favor of it, and 27 voted against it, with 1 person not voting in favor of it. The Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, at least 50 Democrats voted in favor of it, and 27 Republicans voted against it. They tend to have the same voting record. So there's not much difference in the type of bills or anything like that. They just seem to be voting party lines. Some of them are actually anti-immigrant Republicans who try to get everyone else along. And those are those 2 specific bills. The Trust Act, AB 1081, 46 Democrats voted in favor of it, and 0 Republicans voted. And 1 actually did not vote, voted against it. And I believe that was, actually, let me look that information up really quickly. Actually, I can look that up afterwards. One of them, according to my information, I might actually have it wrong or not, but one of them did not vote again in favor of it. 5 did not vote, as opposed to Republicans, it's against 27, 1 vote. For sobriety checkpoints, AB 1389, we had 51 Democrats vote in favor of it, and 1 did not vote. And then for Republicans, we actually had what we can call bipartisan support, because there were 3 individual Republicans that voted in favor of it, as opposed to other bills that everyone's just voting against. At least 22 Republicans voted against this bill, and 3 did not vote in favor of it or against it either. In terms of E-Verify, AB 1236, we can actually see bipartisan support on this bill as well, where 51 Democrats and 5 Republicans voted in favor of it, 0 Democrats voted against it, 22 Republicans voted against it, and no vote, just 1. The Agricultural Workers Bill, which is the last bill, SB 104, 51 Democrats voted in favor of it, and this trend technically goes everywhere. 5101, 5101. This number tends to fluctuate, 26 to 27, 1 to 2 or so. But that's the voting record for our assembly members on these specific bills. And like I mentioned before, it usually goes party lines, except for the sobriety checkpoints and the E-Verify bill. Like I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we did not include AB 353 because we did not have specific language for it at the time, and it wasn't part of my analysis. And I think that's it for the State Assembly voting record.
Mario?
And
I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt. It looks like Reshma has a question.
Okay.
Reshma, you're muted?
Yes.
Oh, I had actually raised my hand in the first break, but I do have an observation, which is obviously this split is pretty expected, but I guess just given the history of the Democrats on this, when they want to kill a bill, they have almost no choice except to hold it in committee, because once it gets to the floor, it's going to get a yes vote. So It's just clear like that's the strategy to kill a bill, not the floor vote.
John, do you want to talk to that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, and just a clarification for the Trust Act, it's actually the final is 47 to 26. And one of the no votes was Shadeo, who's a co-sponsor. But just another comment I have is I think sometimes it's really interesting how these things play out on the floor, because the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, when we watched the vote, it actually was stuck at 40 votes for a minute. And I think everyone was having a bit of a heart attack. And suddenly someone, I don't know who, cast the 41st vote, and then there was some kind of mad stampede to vote for the bill after it had passed. So I think those dynamics are really fascinating. But I think this is a really excellent glimpse at the process.
And Maria, I just want to mention that Ronald is actually on the call, but unfortunately he's having some audio issues, so he's going to send you questions later on via email. Okay?
Great. Thanks, Ron. Are there any more questions about the voting records or comments about the voting records for state assembly or state senate individuals? Okay. So now we're going to move on to future research and question and answers and a broad discussion of what this all means for CIPC's future work. So in terms of like future research, it would be really helpful to include and analyze how the newly drawn districts will affect some of these congressional representatives, as well as state elected officials, and whether they're still going to be in office. But it is safe to say that it's still going to be a Democratic state, and as we have seen, many of our Democratic senators and assembly members tend to vote in favor of pro-immigrant legislation, despite the fact that we might have some instances where we question their voting habits or not. So that's the only thing that I would suggest in terms of like future research. And then I just want to open it up to question and answers and a broad discussion of, like I said, what does this all mean for CIPC's future work, and as well as the immigrant populations within specific districts like Republican districts.
Well, we did say something about redistricting, right, in the agenda?
I'm sorry?
Is there a slide on redistricting?
I did not include specific slides about redistricting because the finalized maps are not official yet, because they're still being modified, I believe, right, if I'm not mistaken. And so I haven't included them in this slide, but once they are finalized, I will go ahead and do a further analysis about the differences between then and now and how it might actually impact specific voting records or anything of that nature in the future, like the specific demographics within those districts as well.
Yeah, because I think it's going to be really interesting. This is very helpful because it also gives a good point for comparison when those maps are finalized.
I have a historical question. I guess Isabel's not here, so maybe for you, Reshma, or Sarah. Okay, obviously, 15 years ago or so, this probably wasn't the case. So when did this trend kind of emerge of the Democratic Party on more or less a party line vote with a few dissenters kind of taking a number of pro-immigrant stances? I'm just curious.
Isabel might be better to answer this question, but it's been the case ever since, I've been working here, and that's 10 years ago, but I think it's a historical trend, actually, much beyond my time at least.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Because certainly in many other states, the Democratic Party could not be counted on to take these positions.
Yeah, I also think it's partially because of, we have so many Latino legislators, particularly from Los Angeles, that represent high immigrant populations. So, in fact, even in 2002, 2003, I know some of the legislators were like tripping them over themselves to sponsor pro-immigrant legislation. So I think that that's a long-term trend.
Thank you.
I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's really striking the newly arrived foreign-born population in Northern California, with the exception of San Diego, and I'm wondering how that, what that means in terms of moving policy for on safety net issues in those legislative districts. And I'm wondering, I'm wondering if there's more support, or if we should be thinking through those Senate representatives, whether Senate or Assembly member, about anything that we do as it relates to access to health care, and supporting additional bills, because it seems to me that they would have, ideally a vested interest in making sure that those populations have access to the safety net. And possibly, as Mario had mentioned, maybe those are areas where there may be higher numbers of undocumented immigrants. We weren't able to get into that level of specificity given the existing sources that Mario had readily available. Mario had proposed maybe using some of the data from
the Public Policy Institute of California, because they came out with a report detailing the specific estimates of the number of undocumented residents within county and city levels using the tax ID number. And so if we were able to utilize that type of information using the tax ID number and apply it to congressional and state districts, it would allow us to look further into the number of undocumented people living within a given district. And specifically for congressional Republican districts and immigrants who are coming after 2000, questions of like, how are these immigrants adjusting in these type of Republican districts that are primarily anti-immigrant, right? As opposed to Democratic districts who tend to be much more immigrant-friendly. And looking into information about immigrants who've been living here before 2000, how they've been able to access some of these networks in order to establish themselves within specific districts as opposed to other ones. And so looking at that type of information would require qualitative research, talking to immigrants and some of the organizational partners that we may have throughout California in these type of districts, and seeing how they're able to navigate long-term and recent immigrants within that district to resources that are needed for them.
And I was just a little cautious about our interaction of asking possibly PPIC to give us, or PPIC, whatever their acronym is, to give us their direct data. I really wanted to be mindful of that. So that's why we didn't specifically use their data sources to create specific graphs around the undocumented population. But that was something that Mario was fully aware of, and we knew that those specific details wouldn't necessarily be captured in this analysis. But we do recognize that moving forward, that how we access such data could be important in helping us shape policy in the future and the advocacy that we do.
Yeah. And I just wanted to thank Mario for pulling this all together. I think it's really fascinating to see all of these percentages and graphs and have insights into, the makeup of some of these districts, especially for people who are very notable for their stances one way or the other. I think it sheds a lot of light. One thing for the future, I think another factor that for future research would be interesting, I don't know if there's any specificity on mixed status families. I know there are estimates. I was just, with the Obama situation, I'm sure we're all aware of, with the president's possibly undocumented uncle having an ICE detainer on him right now. There's a lot of attention to mixed status families. And I saw that there was an estimate, I forget by who, that conservatively there are at least 8.8 million people in mixed status families in the U.S. It may be more. But I think that would also be fascinating. If we are, like, next year going to run certain bills around enforcement, if we knew in certain areas where there were persuadable legislators that there was a huge mixed status population, that could be a very strong point to make. We know that people who are in those mixed status families are just, overwhelmingly, I think, more personally sympathetic to a lot of enforcement issues.
Right, and I think that type of information is not included in the census data because it doesn't distinguish between generational statuses or whether you were born to immigrant parents or not. But having that type of information might be helpful in terms of further analyzing the way we're able to mobilize certain individuals, specifically individuals who are able to be naturalized or first generation children of immigrants who are not registered to vote, and like getting them engaged to do policy changes at the local level or things of that nature. And I think that's about it for my presentation unless other folks have any further questions.
This has been so helpful. Thank you, Mario. I've been away, so I'm wondering how long you're going to be with us.
Well, technically my internship was supposed to end on the 26th, but given the fact that Gabriela and I had made a work plan for all the way up to September 1st, and other circumstances that recently came out, today is technically my last day, that I will be able to physically be present in the office. But as I had mentioned and asked Gabriela previously, whether it would be possible for me to fulfill some of my other current tasks that haven't necessarily been finalized around the Secure Communities campaign. And I am more than happy to continue to work on this presentation and include a lot of the feedback and suggestions that were made just now.
Well, thank you so much. I haven't had even, I think, the opportunity to meet you, but clearly you're doing great work, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So if there aren't any more questions or comments, I hope you can help me help me to thank Mario for this really good, sound analysis. I think it gives us a lot of food for thought about where we've been and where we are now, and thinking through the next steps. Since we are going into our September staff retreat, talking about planning for our various enforcement work, and then also some of the planning for other areas in terms of policy advocacy. So I think this is a good ground and can help us really shape these discussions in the future. Oh, and I see, Ron's question was, there was a big shift after 9/11.
I think that might actually explain why there was a lower foreign-born population that entered after 2000.
Yes, sorry, that was actually Sarah's response to John's question.
Oh, I see.
Wait, which question? The question about where does the historical trend of the California Democratic Caucus taking pro-immigrant stances?
Let me check. Sarah, are you on?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. You're on.
Sorry, I think I got your question wrong. I thought you were asking about Republicans.
Oh.
So the video
but are you
shift after 9/11 amongst Republicans? I think that the hatred was always there, but I think we definitely saw a big change after 9/11.
So that in California, the chances of getting any major bipartisan support became less after 9/11. I mean, sounds surprising.
Yeah, I mean, for example, like the DREAM Act when it was first introduced, which was prior to 9/11, actually had a lot of California Republicans on as co-sponsors. And since then, obviously, they won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But I mean, I don't know further history than that because obviously there have always been a lot of issues like with Prop 187, etc.
I mean, I find it interesting, these kind of isolated cases of very unlikely Republicans who have taken pro-immigrant stances. So there's the mayor of that small town in Georgia who was in Time magazine, who's suing against the anti-immigrant law. There's the Illinois Republican pro-life sheriff who's against ESCOM because of his pro-life values, which I know that gives most of us a weird feeling. But I just wonder about in some of these districts where we are seeing these demographic shifts or these populations that are out of sync with their representatives. Like, what potential is there for those voices in California to also emerge?
Well, I think one of the things, though, is that the organizing within the Republican Party or the conservative movement, and I mean, I don't necessarily know what the impact of the Tea Party has been, but even prior to the Tea Party, has been an outright, shaming of legislators. And a lot of it, I remember, there's actually Howard Berman who had first told me about this, but there's this show in LA on AM radio called the, I think it's the Bill and Ken show or something like that. Yeah, John and Ken, and they're these conservative pundits, but they do an outright shaming of a lot of Republican legislators, both, members of Congress and the legislature, and certainly immigration has been a part of that. So I feel like until that changes, those are really problematic.
Or progressive lefty pro-immigrants start shaming Dems to take a bigger leap.
Oh, I think we know some of those people who are doing that. But I do think that the demographic information that Myra shared in the voting records show that at least to get a few votes over a majority, there seems to be some level of safety and that the need for bipartisan support, I mean, it helps, probably particularly with the governor, but that we do seem to have a voting bloc so far, at least in the legislature. Which is I feel like so many other states, if they saw this presentation, they would just probably, weep with envy.
Well, great. So if there aren't any further comments or questions, we're going to conclude the webinar. Feel free to contact Mario directly. Oh, I'm sorry, Anais?
Yes, I thought I was on mute. Well, basically just a comment. In the past, I have learned that, for example, the Women Leagues of Conservation Voters, I don't know if that's the correct name of that organization. They also do a scorecard on several of the legislators, and actually it is fantastic how many legislators use that as part of their political campaign. Whenever they're running again for re-election, they say, this is the scorecard that I was given by the Sierra Club, or I was given by the Women Conservation Voters. And perhaps if we also publish a scorecard in immigration issues for these politicians, they might also use it, or, it will be kind of like their credentials. And at the same time, I was also thinking that for those who are really champions for immigrant issues, I don't know if CIPC has done this in the past, but it is also a fantastic tool to do some fundraising. Like, you have an event at the end of the legislative calendar year, and you honor that legislator or those legislators that that have been real champions who have obtained the highest scores from us because of their votes in favor of immigrant issues.
So can I just mention, we actually used to do that when I first came to CIPC in 2003. We actually had a scorecard in 2001, and we had one in 2003, 2004, the first year I was here. And I think what we found is, and I don't know how it is for the environmental movement or other movements, but it was kind of what Mario was showing now, where all the Democrats voted for and all the Republicans voted against it. And then we also were thinking about honoring champions, but then I think we're concerned about like the number of champions that we have, and then picking out a couple of them. So actually we purposefully got rid of the scorecard as a project in 2005 because we found it's very, very time intensive to do, and it wasn't we didn't find it at that time the most effective tool to kind of nudge legislators to change, because they were voting for stuff anyway. And people were not that interested in it. So we had a lot of leftovers. There were some requests, but I still actually have a box of that. I can give you one.
Thanks for sharing.
I think the other thing about scorecards, particularly on immigration, I mean, I think some legislators would probably take pride in the fact that we would score them low, right? So I think that's just one other thing to kind of warn against, possibly, if we were to think about doing it again.
And certainly there are, obviously it can be done. I mean, there are, just when it's in the process of making the scorecard, there are a number of 501c3 issues you just have to be cautious about, which I'm sure we did in the past, and I'm in touch with Alliance for Justice, so they can always guide us. But,
and on that note, I'd just like to add that, I think some groups have been curious, not necessarily a scorecard, but just the consolidated information of like the voting record on this issue. And so there has been interest in that, not with the grading system, but more just informational.
That's interesting. I wonder if, as we go out for the listening tours, if we could create like adapted, I don't know, pieces that just a little page or something. I don't know if people would want that, but if we're going to the Central Valley, can we tell them a little bit about some of their legislators? Maybe they don't need that. I don't know.
I think a comprehensive report of the agenda. We did the Immigrant Day agenda, and then so it's like, I think it would be awesome to send out something you could click on each bill. I don't think we should print it, but you could click on each bill and you could see the votes. In a format that's more digestible than leg info, which kind of looks like a big hard to read. You could click on each vote, you could click on each member, there could be notes. I'm totally fascinated by this, like, who votes for it first and then who stampedes on later. I know that's a silly level of detail, but I think it's really interesting. So I think that I could see that in an email blast.
I mean, that would be interesting.
I think that open rates would be high. It's like, see what happens. It could be on September, whatever.
Right, I really like that idea. I would only add the physical copy because I think when we go to some events where a lot of community members are there, they don't necessarily have access to that. And I think some groups are interested in also sharing that with their community leaders. And so if there's a way that we could have it where it's not so thick, but have something that's physical too, I think that would also be helpful when we do events or like go to different conferences or something like that.
And I think that also would be interesting to have that information before or when people are getting ready to participate on Immigrant Day, because then they know the people they're going to have a meeting with about the record. I don't know if that's already being furnished because I hardly was there. So
well, I think, both for the listening tour suggestion and Immigrant Day, I think I know for me, even though I know the numbers on a lot of the bills and what the breakout was, it was really helpful just to see those numbers in black and white. And if we can regionalize some of those numbers when we do our listening tour, I think that could be helpful. I mean, I would hope that it could be useful information. And then also as a summary of, how successful were we for Immigrant Day in 2011 and have like some of these voting records out there on some of our key bills, because I know sometimes, especially if it's something like AB 130 and AB 131, so many people have been working on it for over a decade, and it's just really important to show, to demonstrate, that the long voting records, and it's something that needs obviously continued advocacy. But sometimes we came so close, and in other years we were not quite at the mark. But I think just it could be of interest to share this as a measure of how successful our advocacy efforts together as an immigrant community could be if we coalesce around a legislative platform. So I know that we're over time. We had only planned for about an hour with this webinar, but I think that, again, we've got some really good ideas and some questions, and thank you so much, Mario, for putting over a month's work of analysis and research into this. I think you've really given us a great document to do some planning on and food for thought. So thank you very much.
Woohoo for Mario! Woohoo!
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Mario.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Bye.